when black people wake up and become intellectually independent enough to think for themselves, as other humans are intellectually independent enough to think for themselves, then the black man will think like a black man, and he will feel for other black people. And this new thinking and feeling will cause black people to stick together.
Truth seekers, please understand, Mental Dialogue is much more than just a talk show. Each and every Saturday, we communicate with you for two reasons: to dialogue and connect. On the dialogue side, we cater to you intellectual outcasts who feel you have no place for honest discourse on race, sex, culture, and African American business. On the connect side, we've created a community where you can connect with experts specifically in finance, whether personal or business, and mental health, whether it's trauma or to optimize performance, along with all the other skill sets from other MD community members. Our mission was to create a virtual nationwide neighborhood where African Americans learn to trade ideas, goods, and services through social media, meetup, and this podcast. To become a neighbor of the Mental Dialogue Community Club, please visit us at mentaldialogue.com. We are better with you than we are without you. We can be neighbors even though we don't live next to each other. Hashtag raise the culture.
Hey, welcome everybody. It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to technically our 15th episode of the Mental Dialogue Perspective. As I always highlight, almost every show we spent 8 years on Blog Talk Radio, audio only, and we brought it back to the YouTube page. And my sister LaTrice Ross, Diversity Consultant, has been holding me down on many of these shows. So thank you, Queen, for being here together. Just so y'all know, we did not coordinate our shirts. It just happened that way. And with that said, if you will, Queen, introduce yourself, as I have a lot packed in today's show. Excuse me. We typically run about an hour and a half. I got so much packed today, we may go just a little longer, but this is a deep dive I'm happy to take with you. You asked me to highlight some things, and so we're going to touch on the subject today, and then we're going to go into your topic, and I think it's going to take us great places today. But if you will, tell them who you are and what you do and why you're here.
Sure. I'm LaTrice Ross. I've been a diversity professional for about 15, 16 years. I do this because I love this work, even though it's considered illegal these days. And excited to be here and discuss these topics today.
Oh, we probably supposed to be doing this on the Underground Railroad. We ain't supposed to be up
all
up on YouTube, right?
Talking code.
I know, right? Yeah, we got to talk in code. Well, we won't do that. We have two rules with the Mental Dialogue community. If you are a first-time watcher, we started live in barbershops. We have a coffee shop event. You're going to hear more about that later in the show. And now we're on YouTube having these hard conversations on race, sex, and culture. I often say our community, we're the best in the world at having those conversations. That's because of people like LaTrice. We have a vast majority of expertise when it comes to this subject matter, and again, I've studied it for so long myself. I would say I'm an expert per se, if I will. But to get into today's dialogue, before we actually start with the topic per se, I actually am about to make a few shameless plugs with my book, Re-Education of the Negro. I just wanted to start here before we actually get into the subject matter, and I thought it was a good place to start. And it's just basically what I call the birth of mental dialogue. This piece right here is why mental dialogue exists. When I wrote the piece years ago, I didn't know I was going to create a community talking about race, sex, and culture. It was just a thought that I had at one time. And my best friend, I was giving props. One of my best friends, Mark Hollywood Ranger, I read it to him while I was at a barbershop waiting to get my hair cut. And he was like, brother, you got to do something with that. And lo and behold, a few months later, back in 2008, I had my first mental dialogue event. And so I always call this piece the birth of mental dialogue. And I think it's just a good setup to segue to go into today's discussion. Again, this is the birth of the mental dialogue community. It's a journal introduction a journal entry that introduces my book. It says, if you've come to distrust America, at least hope the game is fair. Why would you ever play if you believe the game is not fair? You won't. And if you're not playing, you can't win. African Americans come from a long, proud history of winning. However, unknown to us, we disgrace our past by not taking ownership of a country we helped to build. Don't ask what would America be without Black people and turn around and not be proud of that fact. A sense of pride must re-enter the Black psyche to commit to excellence. Our ancestors understood this and overcame all unlevel playing fields. Anything less reduces us to a scourge of underachievement, and hopelessness. Now we mistakenly wear our underdog status as a badge of honor and sometimes ridicule genuine attempts at improvement. Immigrants, including Africans, come to our country and revel at the opportunity before them, and yet many of us African Americans are mentally blocked from this view. This disconnect from our history leaves our fragile psyche blinded from the giants we once were and still are today. I actually wrote this note that I'm going to add to this in my own book from reading it, where it says, let's become giants again. And together we can raise the culture. So that's today. We're going to raise the culture with this conversation. If you saw the promotions, the question we asked today that myself and LaTrice initially are going to tackle is, what if the world remained black? What if the world's only race was Black people? And I highlighted in the promotions, would history be the same? Would things be very different now? And so, but before we get into that title, any thoughts to just the actual intro? If I can kind of circle you back to that, LaTrice, any thoughts that just kind of came to your mind as I use this intro to introduce today's show?
No, I think it's powerful, especially the part that you're going to add. I think sometimes we forget, because the way our school system teaches us about Black history, many of us grew up thinking that our history began with slavery. And it's not until you get away from that education, perhaps college, perhaps educating yourself, that you understand the ancestry from whence you came. And I think when we begin to understand that and inherit, claim that inheritance, that we can then begin to see ourselves as something bigger, something more than what this country has attempted to minimize us to.
No, absolutely. It is very important, very vital. And we're witnessing right now firsthand, to a degree, the results of not understanding that history, right? When we talk about the Voting Rights Act, which we'll jump into some of that a little later in the show, if you will. But a lot of that is due to not understanding and knowing history, if you will, right? And so, again, we will get into that later. But at the same time, I want to make sure people understand that, yes, it is important to see ourselves, as LaTrice said, beyond the period of enslavement. That is not where our history started. Most people that are watching, you've heard that before, or you even know that. Again, if you watch us, I call y'all the intellectual outcasts out there. So I know that we're kind of talking to the choir with that. However, what I want to highlight in this discussion is, due to, as LaTrice said, we typically won't learn anything additional until a college elective, or if you're self-study. The 12 years of primary education are typically limit and does not properly esteem our youth, our African-American youth especially. And that's just calling it for what it is. And so we always highlight and tell our audience and tell you out there, that additional part is on you. The school does not do it. So therefore you have to take on that, and you should love taking it on. The thing is, they don't see enough of themselves. And so due to, in a sense, chasing that history, and, and that's how I came to love our community, my own self-study from a youngster. I always say for a lot of people, this is the turning point, but the autobiography of Malcolm X. I was already into Black history prior to that, but that was really my turning point to just really Black consciousness, if you will, as this show leads in the intro using Malcolm X's voice. He's a hero of mine. But with that said, getting that level of consciousness, the thing is, when you have to go, in a sense, seek out your history inside of this racial construct, we're going to use that word a lot today, inside of this racial construct, in seeking it out, there is some pride that you get in learning your history, but I don't know that we properly understand how to even someone like yourself, LaTrice, I know you know your history. I know my history. It's a process to go, one, learn that history, but also be able to put it in proper context and use what I learned today while the racial construct continues with the history that it also has. So today we're going to try to walk a fine line, a balancing act to say, hey, I want to understand my history, but how should I be using it today? Any thoughts on that? And then I'm going to share the piece that's going to kick off this conversation.
I mean, when I think about just the conversation in general, because I love music and movies and books so much, the first thought that came to mind when you mentioned that is, would we have the greats that we have? Because a lot of that was born from the struggle. Mm-hmm. And so that's where my mind first went. But then it also went to the colonization that happened, and would Africa have been looted? And if it had not been looted, what would that mean for the world? And so you just sent me on this sort of imagination tour in my head about what could have been.
I respect it. No, I absolutely respect it. And so again, for everybody out there watching, I am going to say to y'all, we are going to be challenging. That's what we do. We challenge. This is critical thinking. We're going to challenge maybe how you see the lens. Again, LaTrice, if you're just now tuning in, she is a diversity consultant expert. She does this for a living. So you're probably going to hear some thoughts that you're not used to when it comes to, in a sense, the term Blackness and how we see the actual construct. But to get this thing started, I'm just going to read this piece and have you respond to it. And this is the start of today's conversation. So I wrote a piece that's not in Re-Education of the Negro. This is for the part 2 that I'll probably try to drop next year. So we've been pushing Re-Education of the Negro for 2 years now. So I may drop part 2 next year. And so this piece probably will make it. And this one is Black Socrates Speaks, If the World Remained Black. The more I learn about race, the better I understand the statement, there is only one race, the human race. In the past, when I would say there is only one race, I said it because scientifically, this is a fact. And to highlight, during the transatlantic enslavement trade, race was contextualized into the construct we know today, or should I say, race was misconstructed. Upon further thought, the current construct of race is so misunderstood that we don't realize if humans, after migrating out of Africa, didn't have to evolve into different skin tones due to climate, human history would still look the same. Also, currently, Ukraine and Russia would still be at war. Israel and Hamas would still be at war. The only difference is they would all be dark-skinned people. This is where I hate we're missing our brother Unc, who's our evolutionary, enthusiast. And so I know he would love to jump in on that. So I hate that we're missing him. Hopefully Brother Unc makes it on the show today for those that saw the promotion. So I do want to highlight that we're hoping to get Brother Unc on. But LaTrice, I'll kind of throw it to you. That's something that I wrote maybe just a few months ago, but it was just me. It was even me furthering my understanding of the construct. Why I came to understand it some years ago, but the more I study it, the lead line I said is the more I learn about race, the better I understand that there is only one race, the human race. Again, you can respond to any part of it, but it's even me was learning more about this construct, and I'm moving away from some of the things that we continuously say and use, and unfortunately, how we pathologize ourselves. That's what the deep dive is going to be about today. But go ahead, Queen, your thoughts on the piece itself.
And it probably took me to a different place I took a personality assessment, a thinking assessment, and I always want to get to the root cause, the why. Mm-hmm. And so as you were talking, I began to think about the why behind why was race even invented. Mm-hmm. And it was because of their Christian values that they would only do things that were moral, they could within a moral framework. And so when they realized that when they branched out to travel and went to the continent and saw these folks, their way of justifying their plans were because they were darker skinned, so therefore they were lesser beings, and they used that framework to justify their maltreatment of enslaved humans. And so I think that I went to a different place, different discussion that I'm not going to go down, but I'm beginning to think, I think this new phase that we are as a society with the rolling back of civil rights and those things is having me to look at race differently, while also trying to balance what's happening to us because of our race. Because we can say it's about fairness. But it's not, because if it were about fairness, then they would look at the whole gamut of information and not just small pieces that fit the narrative that they need for it to fit. And something that you said earlier on, about us helping and being there for one another. The cynicism in me initially said that'll never happen. And in a sense, because I actually started writing a piece, the dichotomy of Thurgood Marshall and Clarence Thomas.
Okay.
And I still kind of stick to that. But it's because race was invented that I stick to that. Had race not been invented, I think it would be a different conversation. But I think because race and that hierarchical structure, it makes it difficult for us to be there for each other.
Right. So what I would challenge you to kind of get into to where I'm centering the piece at. So the challenge I'll bring to you is I don't think you're wrong in thinking that. Where I would push you to think along the lines of, if you think about what I'm saying, if the world remained black, if the world had remained black, like you're calling it cynicism, which I think is fair. That's your fair emotional thought to that. So that's fair. That's a correct terminology. However, what I would challenge you is, if there were no race, the reason you're right, it has nothing to do with race. The reason you're right is, here's something I've said on the show in the past when Brother Uncle's here. Again, we're missing that brother, but we're going to make this work. No races ever came together to do anything. Like we got to understand, race was invented. And as African Americans specifically, we talked about on the last time we did the mental dialogue perspective, how we have a unique culture because of our specific experience, right? Like we're connected to our ancestors genetically. However, Black Americans, to use that terminology to be clear, have a specific culture because our experience was very different than even enslaved Africans that were sent to South America. We talked about that on this show, right? So I'm just kind of massaging and walking you through that. If I just simply say no race has ever came together on anything, you're not wrong. You're right, but you're not. It's not that the cynicism that has you wrong. It's an unfair expectation that you only have due to how we pathologize and construct race.
Okay.
I'm just walking through that. That's where we're going today, if you will, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there wouldn't be an expectation that we as a group, and again, I know you're not being unrealistic or thinking that all 45 million people are coming. I know you're not thinking that.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So I know you're not thinking in the extremes. Like I always tell people, when you have dialogues, when you generalize, you're not ever saying all, take all out.
Right.
So I want to say, because I know you wasn't doing it, but I want to say it for anybody watching, that I understand you are not saying all of us, right? I want to just kind of get that out of the picture. So even in your generalization, you see like you're right, but there's nothing to be cynical about if you understand. I offer, what do you think about this? I said Ukraine and Russia would still be at war. Israel and Hamas would still be at war. The only difference is they would all be dark-skinned people. And this is the only thing I'm tweaking in evolution, is that skin color change wouldn't be affected by climate. Like if that was the one thing that humans did not have to do, I would offer all of these things would happen. I would offer that Africa would be colonized. Your thoughts?
I think it would be, because there would still be this quest for money, for wealth, for gold, for diamonds. And so it just wouldn't have the race factor involved. But the stuff that happens geopolitically, I think it would still evolve very similarly, just because you didn't change any other variable, but remove the variable of race. And so those other drivers would still be driving the things that happen. It would still drive war. It would still drive the desire to expand your land, your wealth, etc. So I think that those things would still happen.
Yeah, let me. I remember some years ago. I think I love the community that you're going to be bringing together here soon or whatever. I spent years having dialogues with, in a sense, trying to bring people together. And then I spent specifically and said, you know what, I'm going to focus on our community. And so, you know, that at Mentor Dialogue, while we welcome any community to take part in what we do per se, I personally focus on us. But I'll say prior to me being personally focused and going to different groups, similar to like one you're about to create now. But I remember years ago laughing at some white supremacists who were highlighting, you know, in a sense what the British had done and, you know, in a sense, the British Empire. And so if you, once you start studying world history and you go way back, here's what you learn about the evolution of any civilization for the most part. It goes all the way back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For the most part, when you see various civilizations rise up, the early parts of the hierarchy, the food, the shelter, those things were taken care of. And so at that point, those civilizations had a time to start thinking about things beyond survival. And so if you understand what I'm saying, that throughout history, anytime you see the rise of a civilization, they had those basic needs met, right? And so while something that we love to say per se as African Americans, and specifically because we understand the construct of race, we love to talk about how the advancement of African civilizations were way in advance of those Europeans while they were stuck in the cage, right? We love, in a sense, to say that or whatever. But at the end of the day, until a civilization gets its basic needs met, it won't rise. That's just the reality. And so what you're talking about for the European area, the area of the world, the quote unquote continent. Why is it a continent? It's because of the racial construct per se. Because you think about it, everywhere else is just a separate continent. They just got this little place, there's a carved out in the world, and they call it a continent, right? But at the same time, the reason they were in caves is because of the environment. It's not. It wasn't. They were behind African civilizations, but it's based on geography. So that part of the world thaws out later, right? It thaws out later. They also have trouble finding fresh water because that area of the world is surrounded by salt water, right? It's surrounded by salt water. So I remember saying to those white supremacists, like, y'all actually think you're superior. You would just get the people that you relate to, they were just in that part of the world, and it makes sense that they would become the best seafarers of the world because they had to spend so much time finding fresh water.
Right.
There was only such a limited amount of time. So when I would laugh at them and say, lucky, like you're not superior, it's just the area in the world that you're in. So now, taking everything I just said and removing race from it, that group of, let's say we didn't evolve again, for those if you just joined, I said if the world remained black, humans in that area of the world, they were some of the most savages and most, because they were constantly fighting for resources. And before, if you understand geography and the evolution of the earth per se, all the lands that are desert now in Africa, you know this, LaTrice, they were all green at one point, right? Like those, that was greenery. So the civilizations there was abundances of food. So that's how the cradle of mankind grows and evolves beautifully, because basic needs were met way in advance of those humans who had migrated out of Africa into those areas where living was hard. Scarcity was a big thing. So tribes fought more for basic needs. So I'm just kind of walking through the process of, yes, those if they were never white, but fought for the same environment, had to fight each other constantly. There's a long history of England and France, those areas fighting each other. They had 100-year war once, right? Like we learned those type of things. Right. That's happening because of the scarcity of the area itself. And it wasn't till humans learned to evolve to farming and other things, and they were having to survive, and they became the best seafarers. And yes, so if you take away race, a black group been the best seafarers and went other places and stayed in a conquering mindset because they were one of the last civilizations area of the world to civilize themselves. So because they had come off of that savagery of fighting one another, they went there with the same mindset. Skin color would not have changed that. Right.
I agree. I just sitting here thinking about if there were no race, if everyone remained Black. I still think there would be ethnic conflict, though.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think everything stays the same.
Right.
I'm not even
everything,
I think everything stays the same. I'm not saying I'm right, but I
Right.
think everything stays the same.
Yeah. Because that was there before. Ethnic conflict was there before race. When folks talk about how Africans sold other Africans for enslavement, those were prisoners of war, ethnic prisoners of war, because the differing tribes were warring with each other. So it's not like they sold their brother into slavery; they sold a prisoner of war into slavery. So I do think that you would still have the ethnic conflicts, but I think when I just think about the grand scheme of thing and where we would be as a society, like I think about the bias that's built into medicine, that wouldn't be there. That's a big one for me. I don't know why. But
I love it. I love it. Go finish. I want you to finish, but I'm gonna actually agree with you. But I'm gonna let you finish and really, really agree with you. But I want you to finish your statement.
Right. So where I'm going is that because so much of our medical science is, it's designed, created, invented, discovered by humans, that bias is present there. And so in it comes, those thought processes, like, for a long time, they thought that Black skin was tougher or more resistant than white skin, and that we could withstand pain more than the white race. We know that's not true now, but it was a thing. And so I believe that the profession of medicine would evolve in a way that would not have incorporated the bias that we see. And so some of the disparities that exist would not, I don't believe would exist had the world remained Black.
I love that. And that's a great challenge. Again, that's why I do these think pieces, right? This is just an initial thought thrown out there. And I think that's absolutely fair. Like even me, just when you first said it, I'm like, oh, you know what? That is something that would be different. Because now what happens is matter of fact, the guy says race was invented after the Civil War. That comes from don't just be another brick on the wall. I would highlight it was invented early in the transatlantic slave trade, and it really boosted itself after Bacon's Rebellion. So that's kind of a research thing I will send you on. Don't just be another brick on the wall. So you're not completely wrong, but I just think your time frame is your timing is off. I agree. So I just know that's just a challenge. We're not going to do the details here. But that's my challenge to you. Go look up Bacon's Rebellion.
Stamps from the beginning. We'll give you that history.
Yep, stamp from the beginning. Yep, that's a great one. Yep, absolutely. Because that's when it got basically put into law. That's what distinguished U.S. American slavery from all others, is getting it put into law in the books, and then and which kind of speaks to what you were just speaking to, LaTrice. So when you say, so while I'm offering a piece from a broad brush standpoint, nothing would be different. You're absolutely right. Once you get narratives and once you get laws specific to the racial difference, then these are the things that could not play out, because it could be something else, but it wouldn't be these things, and the something else more likely would not be exactly like what we see today. Because how could it be? Because we already see how ethnic groups battle. And the process to other people very, very similar. What's the great movie from off of that just reached Origins? I think is the name of it. You said
Origins. Yes.
So she is that Ava DuVernay? Am I saying the right name right? Ava DuVernay.
Ava DuVernay. Yeah.
DuVernay. So I encourage, great book, because it conceptualizes how we other people. So it would have gotten done in another way in the event that, but things definitely be different. Like more likely they wouldn't have, the translated slave trade may not have happened, because here's my guess. If you don't, this part would still happen, because here's a thing that a lot of people don't know. Like, for example, like the way we tell American history, it's like we took it. we took you with our guns, and we took over the Native Americans, right? And that's how the Spanish, in a sense, took over South America and things of that nature. Very people really know, because you speak about the medical industry, 80% of them lost their lives to the viruses that the Europeans, living in close proximity and living very dirty, not very cleanly, came over and brought to. Now we know through DNA evolutionary science that the Native American population specifically that crossed over the Bering Strait or whatever was one of the healthiest groups to ever live. They rarely died of conditions, mostly arthritis and old age, very few conditions. They lived off the land and things of that nature, but they were absolutely not prepared. While the Europeans brought their guns, it wasn't the guns, it was the viruses that was wiping them out, and they could not effectively fight back smaller groups on ships. It's the only reason. Like it wasn't the guns were huge, the guns were different.
Right.
But because of what humans do, hell, they was trading with the Europeans to get guns. So how do you think a group on ships with guns, trading guns with other tribes in this country? Like, if you think it was just the guns, it's actually laughable. But that's how the history is taught. How the West was won, LaTrice.
Right. And so that actually brings me to this other concept of racial capitalism. When we think about how the wealth that was gained through slavery, and we still see the foundation of that, it's still, a lot of what we experience is still predicated on that racial capitalism. I think it would definitely be different, because you wouldn't have the transatlantic slave trade to build the foundation for that wealth. Right. So what do you think would replace that?
I don't think anything would. I think it's very. I think that's that. Yeah, like again, I just wrote the piece, and we're having an open dialogue about it right now, right? And so I actually think you're right as you lean into what you're thinking about, because the reason the U.S. is the #1 GDP in the world is because of the transatlantic slave trade and the movement of how they, in a sense, breeded African Americans specifically. I always like to give a little history on that. So in South America, sugarcane cropping was harder than tobacco and cotton. As much as you and I would never want to spend all day picking cotton, sugarcane cropping was much harder. And so they used a replacement technique because they would just work them to death so quickly. And that's why the majority of enslaved Africans went to South America, just if you've never heard that history. So in America, with us battling with Britain ended enslavement 30 years. They ended their enslavement trade 30 years ahead of us. And because we had become their enemy, they were policing the seas. And so it basically forced us, our country, to come up with another way to do it. So to your point, all of these things would not be happening if there had not been a racial construct to create it specifically on race. Because what ended up being unique was, as I just highlighted, just to give some, I'm trying to make sure I bring all this stuff together. As I highlighted how the Native Americans couldn't hold up to the viruses that the Europeans had. Most people don't know this. The only reason Africans were able to is because we were ahead of the. A lot of the African cultures are already ahead of the European when it came to this thing we call inoculation. I.e. the vaccines. Right. If you really study human evolution, they don't know whether the Chinese area or the African areas were the first to inoculate, but they were the first over all other areas of the world. Like, they don't know which one was first. They hadn't been able to figure that out, but they figured it out. Had we not learned that, then you can't bring us across the waters either. So, so just kind of give us some more history. So yeah, I think things. Because you're right. Once the narrative is created, now we get this very different history specific to the race. Like you talked about the idea of, like I said, of Africans selling other Africans. I always dismiss that because I know the fact that you and I, even right now, as much as we try to get away from the construct of race and understand it in detail, the reason we even say Africa is racial construct. Like, you don't refer to any other continent the way we refer to Africa. That's why we see it as black selling blacks, because we've accepted this construct of race, and we don't realize that in 1965, when they were breaking up Africa, that terminology is what stood. And so that's why we see it as Africans instead of the 300 distinctive tribes that it actually is. Like these things, I know these are things that I'm kind of talking to the choir when I'm talking to you on this conversation, LaTrice. But it's just like, when you start understanding those nuances, you would never, ever expect groups that did not speak the same language to necessarily be coming together. It doesn't mean they have to go to edit, because if you think about Christopher Columbus' writings, his actual writings, when he, when he landed in, more South America, right? Or was it the Caribbean or South America? You recall where he actually landed? I know he never landed in the United States. I can't recall if it was the Caribbean.
I can't remember whether I think it was South America.
Yeah, maybe the West. Think what they call it, the West, or the East. I guess technically, But anyway, so wherever he landed, in his writings, he talked about how the natives were so giving. They would just give you whatever you want or whatever. And he immediately writes, and we can take them over. Again, that mindset from a scarcity culture.
Right.
Having been and having learned of, build, in a sense, really the first big ships that could cross the oceans. Like, there's a lot of, there's a lot of mythology about when did people cross the oceans. But the reality is, humans, as a humans across the world, those in that area finally constructed ships that could regularly cross the actual oceans, and so in them doing so, you ran it. So I say that to say that when you talk about people speaking different languages, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be at war with each other, but to have the concept that a racial group would come together and not understand that all those ethnic differences actually apply to Africans, because we don't learn to speak about Africa that way, is why we think our African brothers sold us. That's why we think that. Go ahead, Queen.
Right. No, I was just looking at the comment that someone made about the Romans and the Greeks, and the same thing will happen to us because nothing lasts forever. But the same thing, the very same thing did, and that's where my mindset was going, that it did happen with the Romans and the Greeks. And so it is weird, just the whole idea of imagining it feels awkward just to begin to think down that path, and understanding that it was more ethnicity or tribal differences, and those would still exist. I think the caste system, you brought up origins. I think the caste system, because that has to do with purity and birth order and things of that nature. Those things would still exist, even if everyone were still black.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what happens is race just ended up being the last iteration of othering someone. Like I'm saying, it's the last one. Right. Like America, it's only 400 years old compared to Japan, which is thousands of years old as a civilization. Right. They weren't a country, but that area is known. They can trace their history. U.S. America, we could trace our history to 400 years. That's it. Like, we're the babies of the world. So it's the last iteration of caste.
Because before that, it was class, it was patriarchy, it was caste, it was, it was all of those things, and those things would still persist even if race had never been invented. Right.
So now, great thought. So here's where I want to go, and I think you're going to love this part of the conversation. I want to play this clip, because now I want to kind of, again, I really hate missing Ankh here, because I know he would be giving us all the evolution stuff of it, right? And that would be some added context. But anyway, we're going to make this thing work. So now this is an area where I think, kind of specific to your work, I just saw this clip, and I think you will be able to relate it to this conversation. I don't think it'll be obvious per se, but I think with your help, we can bring it together. This is a very short clip from this guy named Davon Love. I just recently started following him, and he's on this constantly, and I love kind of some of his cuts here. So let me find this cut and play it real quick. It's real short, but I want to get into how the construct, even for, as you said, it's awkward to even think about this in a new way. I'm challenging us to remove the pathology that race has given us under the construct. We've born into it as a real thing. It's not what I'm saying out. If you hear me clearly, I'm not dismissing the reality of that construct. No. That construct, I've read in my book, has real life consequences. So anybody watching, it's a construct. We're not denying the reality of that construct, but it is time, in my opinion, to reward our ancestors for the efforts they made in this country to get us to a place that I'm not sure that we've come to understand as Black people, specifically in America. That's why, just say this real quick, LaTrice, that's why in the piece saying the giants we once were and still are today. And it's so the goal of the book is to make us aware that we are still those giants, but not giants because we're superhuman, not giants because we're better than. No, the race construct reduced us to less than human. Right. Our ancestors got it to second class citizenship at one point, and our ancestors earned it to the point where, as you and I've talked about this, we use some old methodology for a point we're past, and I don't know that we as a culture, as Black Americans specifically, understand. No, we're full-fledged citizens. There's still issues, right? But I don't know if we've come to understood that we're full-fledged citizens. You want to say a thought before I play this?
Yeah, card? I think it's a fine balance, because you have to balance that, because understanding where we came from and what we've accomplished, adjust our mindset for the better. But we can't forget that we still live in a racist capitalist society that tries to diminish us to second, third class citizenship. And so it's, I think, adapting the mindset, differing how we think about race and our ancestry would impact how we approach the racist society that we sit in today.
Well, yeah, what happens from my perspective, just getting the individual esteem while being aware of what still happens. And we owe it to our ancestors, to the next generation, for what they got us. We owe our next generation an improvement. You can't do that if because some people try to get, think about it. Well, I can, I don't even worry about it and think that's somehow going to be okay. No, you owe from those who fought very hard to move us out of being considered inhuman to second class to where we are today. We must continue that for the next generation. So we definitely are not dismissing it. I love what Emil says here. He says racism is cast amplified by the Industrial Revolution. That is the exact verbiage. It's the time. A lot of things are timing, right? These things were done, and humans evolve and learn certain things. And the timing of it is how, to Emil's point, how America became the lead GDP.
That's why I called it racial capitalism.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. I've never heard that term. I like that term. All right, cool. Let's go to this cut finally. All right, let me see. I'm trying to make sure I'm getting some. Y'all keep giving me the comments, y'all. I'm trying to get to them. Oh yeah, here's a good little one I think you'll like. She loved me on payday. Says identifying as Jewish today means you get white privilege instead of regular old white privilege. And that's a great point though for the dialogue we're having. If you think about it, at least the way I'm understanding, unless you understand it different.
No. I think I'm understanding it the way you are.
Yeah, that lets me know we're being understood. See that kind of comment? Somebody's thinking about it in the nuance that we're trying to bring to this conversation. But again, here's this cut that I think you will personally love, and I think you can help me relate it to today's conversation. Very short clip here. Hold on, let me get to it. Again, this is from Davon Love, 35-second clip.
So if you think of, if you only understand Black folks as pathological, then you're going to structure services that is based more on managing dysfunction than actual empowerment. And that really, if you look at the notion of Black pathology and its impact specifically on the nature of how services are delivered, you will find that many institutions, whether they will say it or not, are really in the business of managing suffering and don't really see it as possible to do anything different.
So my comment, my quote that I love to say: perpetual struggle is a hustle. I think that relates to what he just said, but I'll have you, as the diversity consultant expert here, define pathology and then give me your thoughts to what he's saying, because understanding what he's saying is how we, because I'm worried about our lens, how we see race ourselves. Like there's still going to be the challenge to interact with the rest of the country, and we need to, and you and I agree on that. But I want to kind of walk through this from our lens, our viewpoint first. So if you will, kind of define pathology and explain how we often do it unknowingly, right? Like we people do it with good intent often.
Right. So when I think about, Black pathology, it's the things that, the issues, the problems, the impact, the outcomes of the things that have been done to us. So to me, the focus is the pathology is the outcome of the suffering, the outcome of the poverty, the outcome of the oppression, the outcome of the bias and the prejudice. And so when from framing it from the perspective that he was, when he was talking about nonprofits and how they focus on the pathology, in a sense, he's just flipping it and saying, framing it differently. So, but that's important. How we frame things. Like when I would discuss white privilege, I stopped presenting it as unfair, unearned advantages and flipped it to unearned disadvantages that Black folk inherited simply by virtue of the skin that they were born in. And so when you talk about pathology, we're talking about, I think, and to me, it's a tool of white supremacy, because you're talking about, saying that Black people are more intrinsically violent than white people. That's not true. More prone to criminal behavior, Black on Black crime, which is a myth. It's crimes of proximity. So when we deal with Black pathology, I think it's high time that we dispel that myth and start calling a thing that it really is. And these are, the things that Black folk experience, the things that are used to stereotype us negatively. These are the outcomes of the things that have been done to us but they don't define us as a people, and they definitely don't apply to us as a race. Just as others are afforded the opportunity to have individual problems and individual issues, we are one race where the behaviors of one impacts us all. And one of the things,
let me jump in right there. Let me go real clear and let you finish. So if you're watching and if this is the first time you're hearing, I'm not assuming all of y'all it's the first time y'all hearing this, but again, I just love what LaTrice does. And what I really want to highlight is the nuance is the construct makes us think that it impacts us all. And if you recall, I don't know if you recall this from the last you was on a couple of weeks ago, I highlighted that white people never do that. And if you remember, I talked about that. They never do that. When a mass shooter comes about, they don't take ownership of that. And I also concluded that is the right way to think. It is the right way for humans to think. I'm using the racial construct to explain it. We have to speak. We don't have to. I am speaking in the language that the construct gives us. But in all reality, if I could literally say, what in this situation, what white Americans do with the master shooter, I can literally say, that as humans, they don't look at this one crazy, extreme mass shooter and say, oh, that's a reflection of us as humans. And so when I start using the term and get away from the race, we mistakenly do that with our issues. So that's why I wanted to get clear when you said, I know you didn't mean that it impacts us all, but I wanted to give the nuance for those watching. We mistakenly pathologize. We're explaining pathology here. Pathologize it, and there is a little ownership because of our love for one another. But that comes from we were raised in a struggle culture. We were not allowed to create our own culture like most ethnic groups were. Because we come from a struggle culture, we relate to one of us being harmed, whether it's done by another one of us or not. So So that's where that natural empathy is there, but we pathologize it and think something's wrong with us. And that
and that concept that you mentioned is called linked fate. Like we know that could happen to us because of our skin color. But what we have to understand, so first of all, Black pathology is real, but we need to understand that the cause of it is external and not internal. That's the mistake that happens.
Yes.
White supremacy makes it as if it's something that's intrinsically wrong with us instead of what's done to us. And it's what would happen to any human being that's treated in such a way that they are dehumanized, that they engage in economic exclusion, family separation, our communities have been destroyed. All of that are the external factors that created the Black pathology. And it does not mean that that is something that is intrinsic to every single person from our community.
And let me give a real life example. And Thomas Sowell talked about this. Like at the end of the day, a lot of the things that we call Black culture actually comes from our proximity to elite Europeans who created race, the construct that we're talking about today, through written narratives. That's what happened. Mm-hmm. But it was because poor whites and poor Black indentured slaves would take over them, right? Like that's the orders behind them pathologizing, or writing in the law, I should say, is so that they wouldn't come together. Our proximity was to the people, like the term crackers. That ain't something Black people made up. Right. That's what Europeans call other Europeans from certain areas. A lot of them got sent to Georgia because they were, on criminals and things of this nature. But that's what they call Europeans that came to this country from certain areas. I forget the areas. I wish I've studied the areas. I just don't remember them right now. I don't want to tell people the wrong information. But I'm saying all this to say, based on what LaTrice just said, these different things that we have that were done to us, and other groups would do the same thing. Our actual language and dialect came from being close proximity to the whites that they call crackers, who the elites have always stayed away from and still live very poor throughout the South right now. A lot of our original culture came from seeing what they did upon those that were able to travel after the Civil War. Like a lot of sharecropping happened because a lot of African Americans could not move. That's why a lot of sharecropping happened.
Right.
But for those who could get around and have that close proximity, a lot of the stuff we did is just what humans do under those conditions. Like if you were ever to go read what Europeans were saying about those they call crackers, it literally sounds exactly like what you say about Black people today. They're loud, they're reaction, they're violent, and that's who it, like literally that is literally what you would, again, which speaks
even
to
if
your
you take
point.
The word ghetto and how that started with the Italians when they were pushed into certain communities, they said the same things about them that they now say about Black folk.
So if any of what we're saying right now makes sense, LaTrice, you broke it down. We've internalized something that comes from outside factors, and we take it to heart. Even with good, go ahead.
To heal from this, we have to call those things what they are. We have to identify what those external factors are that created the way that we pathologize ourselves, and the way that others pathologize us, and the way that we intrinsically begin to believe those things. I mean, oftentimes, you hear that you're this and you're that, and you're ugly, your nose is big, your lips are big, all those things. You begin to believe that whether you acknowledge it externally or not. And so we have to begin to call a thing, and then no, I'm not those things. And I think if the mindset shift that you are suggesting would go a long way towards changing how those things, those external factors impact us intrinsically.
No, absolutely. All right, y'all. I'm going to go to a quick 1-minute commercial just to highlight our upcoming Mental Dialogue live experience next Friday for those of you in Atlanta. So we're going to go to this commercial, and we're going to come back right after that. Matter of fact, I'm going to do the commercial and then go right into a clip, talk about Killer Mike for those who are aware of things that are happening with Killer Mike. And I'm going to give both sides of it, so we're going to have this dialogue. But let me play this commercial, and we'll be right back, y'all. Atlanta, Friday, May 15th at 7 p.m. Pull up to the Mental Dialogue Live experience at Urban Grind. This ain't your average game night. It's cards, competition, bold debates, real networking, and short conversations with people who came to connect. Business owners and event hosts, bring your pitch because you'll get 1 minute to promote your brand live in the room. Good coffee, big energy, smart people, and real dialogue all night long. Find us at 962 Marietta Street Northwest. Get details now at mentaldialogue.com. All I ask is that you think.
How did you enjoy your experience?
You can't tell me we didn't build America because I don't care who has drafted up the plans. Who put hammer to nail?
Who did the work?
Cotton was one of the most valuable resources in the world. If that cotton didn't get picked by these black hands, and those black hands that were up north working in textiles and industry, if they didn't thread that cotton and make it into something to be sold, what would this country have been? Slavery gave this country a 250-year head start economically. If Haiti wouldn't have sent the French back packing, America never would have had Louisiana, never would have had Texas, or anything worse than that. Because they kicked the French's ass in such a bad way, they had to leave, and economically, they couldn't fight the ex-Brits that were over here anymore for this land. So the reason you even have America, and Frederick Douglass talked about this, the only reason you have it is because a bunch of Haitians kicked a bunch of French folks' ass.
So we see a clip from my man Killer Mike breaking down some real history. You know, absolutely. Killer Mike, you know, for those that know, he's, you know, or don't know, he's a rap star per se, but he's also kind of become an activist, and it's not abnormal for our community, in a sense, to look to sometimes our entertainers to be a voice for us, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a place where he's, in a sense, being a good voice to us. Again, I wanted to highlight that. I love the history that he pointed out. He's absolutely mm-hmm. right. The oversized effect of the Haitian Revolution. Like, if you really study that history, you will learn that there was a connection to a lot of the rebellions that happened in this country. All of it was very connected in a way that is very ingenious when you actually understand what our ancestors did. There's a lot to, in a sense, be proud of and look to. But he's absolutely right. That is how, over time, the domino effect is actually getting the Louisiana Purchase. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of history behind that. That played a huge role in it. Go ahead if you want to say a quick thought.
No, I was just going to say I agree wholeheartedly. And as we enter in this conversation, I think that, one of the things to keep top of mind is that two things can be true at the same time.
Absolutely. So now what I want to do is go to a piece by this sister. I'm just going to read a few words from it, highlighting a sister that tells Killer Mike, just based on where he's been landed politically recently. Again, all of this stuff is related. Some of the things where they're like, hey, Killer Mike, shut up. And I'm gonna put this is the actual what she put up, and I forget I just did this on my show. We do a political show for those out there, and I keep forgetting to say her name. So forgive me. I got a cut that's gonna say her name. I think. Do you know the name of the lady that wrote this, Queen?
Let's see.
Tony something. I think Tony.
I'll get it.
I want to make sure I say her name and give her props.
Yeah, I'll get it.
I just copy the words and forgot to copy her name. So I want to make sure I give her props before I share these words. This is a few of the words from her article.
Okay. It is
Tony. I think it's Tony.
Where is that? Someone sent me that one.
I will get the name for y'all. We don't keep y'all waiting. So I'm going to say the words and then we'll get her name in a second. I'll get it in a second. So she says to Dear Killer Mike, there was a time when I listened. When you spoke about organizing, about ownership, about building something durable for Black people in a country that has never made it easy for us to breathe, let alone thrive. I listened. Many of us did. You had credibility. You had lived it. You sounded like a man who understood the stakes, but somewhere along the way, the message got twisted, or maybe the moment did. Either way, what you chose to do with your platform had consequences, real ones, measurable ones, and no amount of posturing or rhetorical backflips can wash that away. Let's be plain about it. You spent years building credibility as the conscience of Black political imagination, the one who would tell us the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient. So let's tell one now. When the country was choosing between a flawed coalition and an authoritarian, you went on national television and declined to endorse. You lent credibility where none was deserved. You amplified narratives that depressed turnout, that seeded distrust, that told people their vote didn't matter, or that both outcomes were equally disposable. They weren't. They never are. Here's the part that's hard to hear. Influence without accountability is just ego dressed up as activism. And for too long, too many people with microphones have been allowed to operate without ever reckoning with what happens after the applause. You don't get to light a match and then step back from the fire. I'm going to let you go in however you feel like, Queen, but it's definitely, we'll give a little more context. This sister, we'll get her name in a second.
Goldie Taylor.
What was it?
Goldie Taylor.
Goldie Taylor. I'm sorry, I said Tony. Goldie Taylor. This was written on her Substack. That's her article. That was just a little piece of it. She goes way more in depth than I did. But LaTrice, just your first thoughts, because there's an aspect of, she's just talking about the accountability of once you are a voice out there, there are real life consequences, is what she says. That's the thing that I picked up on. Your thoughts, Queen?
And I agree with her on that when you have a platform and you have that influence, you have to think around corners, so to speak, because you have to think about the impact of what you say and the message that you send to those who follow your platform. And I don't think that that was done critically and cautiously when he made those statements.
Yeah, fair enough. And so again, this is not even personal to Killer Mike as far as me personally is concerned. However, when we see what we're experiencing currently with the administration, the play out of it, there's deep dialogue. And again, we have this show called The Politically Conscious, where we are trying to raise the consciousness of our political understanding. I highlighted on that show this week, LaTrice, again, as I highlighted at the beginning of the show, Malcolm X is a hero of mine. And I highlighted when he was, unfortunately he was killed not too long after this, but when he started his own Organization of African Unity, he was talking about the need to understand politics in a more thorough way than our people currently did at the time that he was speaking of. Mm-hmm. And so, and I think, by losing him, we lost sight of, in a sense, the importance of politics, right? I understand people becoming, if you will, apathetic. I understand how it happens. But I think one thing that our culture, in my opinion, fails to understand is at 13%, how it still is imperative that we keep it important despite how politics, in a sense, can make us feel. And so in this situation, Killer Mike also presenting himself as a voice, then there is Goldie Taylor saying, hey, well, now that you've presented yourself and did it in this way, we speak about, because had he said something or done something that benefited, and he has, and that's something that Shelley Winters pointed out on my show the other day, which I'm very aware of this. I'm very aware of him getting the money for the trade schools here in Georgia. I'm very aware of him working to, for example, as they were gonna, in a sense, start policing more under Governor Brian Kemp. Killer Mike played a very vital role in ensuring that the language didn't just have it set up to where they could just pick boys up. In the way they was writing it originally, they could have just picked boys up for any old thing. And so again, I want to credit when you've done something well, but as a voice, this is the other side of it. So Goldie Taylor says, hey, at this point, she doesn't feel like he's helping. And it's not me agreeing or disagreeing. It's just about having the proper dialogue that in stepping up, this is what comes with it. I wanted to let you hear what Shelley had to say about Killer Mike. Him and they are good friends, just to give that context for anybody out there watching. If you've never heard of Shelley Winters, he's a conservative show host here in Georgia. So you're going to see what he had to say on our show in defense of Killer Mike. And I'm very interested in what you would have to say to Shelley's response, LaTrice, if you will. And I got a little bit of Emil who's watching, a little bit of his at the tail end of it as well. So you're going to hear Shelley and just a little bit of Emil on this cut. And I want to hear your response to this, LaTrice.
Her article. I know Goldie Taylor. She's a beautiful, brilliant woman. But on this, I disagree. for several reasons. One, you're making Killer Mike, the Ta-Nehisi Coates, the Mark Lamont Hills. These Democrats are making them scapegoats. The basic issue is African Americans per Gallup and per Pew Research are moving away from the Democrat Party. And the reason why they're moving away, they're not going to the Republican Party, don't get me wrong, but they're moving away from the Democrat Party. And the reason why they're moving away is to our conversation that we were just having right here. They don't feel like anything changes. You've had Democrat majority Congress, Democrat majority Senate. You've had Democrat presidents. You've had all three at the same time, several times over the last several election cycles. And African Americans, by and large, will look back and say, nothing's changed for me. Nothing's changed for me. Now, you can argue the different things that do change, but if someone doesn't feel it or see it, it never happened. And so that being the case, what Killer Mike did when he was on, I think it was Bill Maher, when they asked him about Kamala, he was like, or I think it was not Kamala, about Hillary, either one, he was like, no comment. Well, no, I'm not going to go out there and endorse her simply because. I'm not. And he has that right. But to think that the vast majority of black people are sitting around waiting to hear what Killer Mike or Ice Cube or any other pundit has to say about anything, and they're responsible, I just don't think. I think it's patronizing at best. I will say what Killer Mike did do, what she was referring to, what he did do was reflect the feelings and opinions of thousands and thousands of African Americans nationally, in barbershops and beauty salons, on the street corners. That is what people were saying at the time. You know, this idea I see on Facebook, oh, you brothers that didn't want Kamala, look at you now. Well, there's a bunch of brothers who didn't want Kamala, who didn't want Kamala for whatever reasons they had. You know what I mean? It could have been California prosecutor. It could have been any number of reasons. They didn't want a woman. It doesn't matter. There were a number of people who did not support her in the black community. There are a number of people who didn't support Hillary in the black community. There are a number of people in the Republican Party that didn't support Trump for various reasons. This idea that Killer Mike is to be blamed because what we have now is absurd to me, especially a man that spent so much of his time trying to help African Americans and talking and advocating for black people. I think it's an absurd accusation, and it's no different than them going after anybody else in our community all of a sudden. But
for example, when they went after Jim Brown just from talking to the president, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
A huge history of supporting us.
Right.
Emil, I don't know if you got a chance to read more of the article or you can respond to just the part. Okay, go ahead. Your thoughts on what you saw in there.
So this is sort of a conundrum that we face in our community that I'll just say out loud, and that is that we have outsized voices that can influence people, and I would love to be where Shelley is and say that, you know, they don't have that voice, but we're not talking about a voice with no say over the people whatsoever. These voices actually do have some significant influence. And if they know they have significant influence, I'm not going to tell them what to say. They have the right to say whatever they want to, but they have to be mindful of the influence they do wield. That is their responsibility. However they wield it, they need to be mindful of it. And the problem is apathy is a vote.
LaTrice, your thoughts on anything you heard there?
Okay, so it pains me to say this with you just don't know, but I do agree with some of what Shelley said, and that pains me tremendously. I agree more with where Emil was heading.
Me too.
And here is why. Celebrity political positioning matters differently in our community than it does the white community. When Taylor Swift gave a nod to Kamala to white suburban women, they're going to be okay regardless. But when a celebrity from our community has a tremendous amount of influence, makes a statement that magnifies apathy. And it makes it okay even to feel that way, and thus the subsequent actions seem to be okay. And so I don't think that Killer Mike in his statement elected Trump. What he did was he helped make Black non-alignment acceptable when it was most dangerous. Now, his frustrations with the Democratic Party were absolutely warranted. And my one call to action here is that we hold the Democratic Party to account in the same manner, if not a larger manner, than we're holding Killer Mike, because they continue to seek our vote and almost think it as a given. But when they are in office, they fail to govern for us. And that's a big deal. So
let me ask you about that. Let's dig into that, because I said on the Politically Conscious show that I was going to bring some politics to the mental dialogue perspective, which I rarely do. Okay. But let's dig into that, because what Shelley highlighted, that was but a part that he was correct about. He's like, well, Killer Mike really just reflected the voices of those who feel that, that they're getting nothing. And he said, he basically said on this show we could dialogue about whether that's real or not, but that is people's feelings, right?
And I want to add that he minimized that influence. We can't minimize that, because it carries different weight in the Black community than a celebrity endorsement in the white community. Absolutely. For various reasons.
Yeah. Definitely get that point out. I didn't mean to cut you off on that part. I do want to highlight, again, politically conscious. This is where we do more of this, but you're pretty politically attuned as well. And so I would agree with a lot of Killer Mike's sentiments towards the Democrats as well. Mm-hmm. However, we also, something that Emil and myself, I'm the independent. For those who don't know, politically conscious, I got Emil on the left, Shelley on the right, or Leo Smith serves as the right. I'm an independent, so I try to serve in the middle as much as possible. So if you're listening to me now, this is not me siding with one party or the other. This is just me trying to walk through what I consider the actual factuals of these things called politics in regards to our community. And so I just gave that preface to say this. So I would say me and Emil are often talking about, and even Leo's agree with this, the Democrats are also horrible at messaging about what they actually do for our community. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason that they're horrible, not just horrible because they're bad. Part of it is the continued, in their eyes, the continued attempt at wooing the middle of the road right. They're too afraid to loudly announce this policy has affected Blacks in a positive way. They always think that for the close elections, they have to try to woo that middle of the road Republican. That's why you see a Tallarico win so very easily over a well more seasoned Jasmine Crockett. I'm talking about seasoned politically.
But I'm throw patriarchy in there too now.
I think it plays out if it's a white woman though. I think that plays
right.
out.
I said patriarchy. Absolutely.
I'm just saying if it's, I'm just highlighting that I don't think it plays out different if a white woman was running in Texas than if it was a white male. You see what I'm saying? Like I don't think that plays out any different. I think the Democrats are constantly wooing the middle of the road conservatives, and in doing so, they're never gonna message the things they actually do. And again, when I say actually do, I'm not trying to highlight it and make it bigger than it is. But right. I said at the end of my show on I think we did it on Wednesday. We always do a pop-up show. So whatever day it was, I said this at the end. I don't know that Americans actually understand what we should be getting from politics. So I'm saying that to say I'm about to highlight what we have gotten, not to say we've gotten it in this to the degree that we needed to be, but I also know the Democrats will never highlight what I'm about to say. For example, like when we say like I had a friend this week pose that we've got nothing from the Democrats.
It's not true.
Right. So again, I'm talking about collectively as a group, not me personally. I'm an independent. I'm just saying, here's what I know we've lost. We went from $9 billion in government contracting to $1.4 billion in government contracting.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're in DEI and you're having to do your work secretly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So here's a quick cut to figure. You say when we have got nothing, what happens is while Democrats are not going to cater to us openly, they don't do enough. While I will agree with you on your critique, we still have to be aware of one group is taking something away. Whereas while we can say Democrats, you have not done enough, but you also can say you don't see that party working against the collective.
And I do it. That's why I said two things.
With their guardrails. Right. Here's a clip that a lot of people are unaware of. This is not even, in a sense, this is not under the Trump administration, but it is due to again, for me, I'm just talking about facts. Anybody listening? You could think I'm on the side. I'm just talking about facts. So Trump puts these people on the Supreme Court. Here's the results that most people don't know about. So I'm going to play a cut. I'm pretty sure this is going to surprise a lot of people. It's not going to surprise LaTrice because she does this work all the time. Most people don't know what I'm about to share right here. So you don't know what you lost. So you say, oh, I got nothing. I got nothing. No, you don't know what you got or what you didn't get. But here's an example.
As MIT's incoming first-year class began orientation this week in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the elite university's president speaking out about the makeup of the class of 2028.
What it does not bring as a consequence of last year's Supreme Court decision is the same degree of broad racial and ethnic diversity.
The roughly 1,100 members of the class, the first shaped in part by the Supreme Court's decision striking down affirmative action in school admissions.
I'm very surprised and I'm honestly shocked that it would have dropped so much.
Black and African Americans making up just 5% of students compared to 13% in the previous 4 years. Hispanic students, 11%, down from 15%. But Asian American students up 47% from 41%. And white students holding steady at 37% from 38% previously. Students we spoke to here concerned.
I do think, like, when I look out at my class, you see a lot of people who look like me and much fewer people who look different from me.
Diversity is actually one of the biggest reasons that I came to MIT.
I definitely think it's a stunning shift.
MIT professor Danielle Wood believes cutting race from the equation was a mistake. What do you think that does to the campus at large?
I think it harms the campus. There is a lot of research that shows that it's important for students of all backgrounds to feel both welcomed and as though they belong. Plus, more diverse environments produce more innovation.
Wood is both the chair of the African American Studies program at MIT and a former student.
I really would say that I'm in mourning, in part because I know there's people like me who might have had a chance to study at MIT and they won't have that opportunity.
At least 3 other schools releasing their data showing dips in black enrollment ranging from small to 8%.
How do we get the desired results of diversity without compromising merit?
Deborah Alexander's son, Augie, is starting the college application process. She says she values diversity, but that the playing field needs to be leveled well before college.
Admission to college should be based on, again, that best fit. And the best fit for an academic setting should be the academic merit of the child.
Here at MIT, the university is vowing to find ways to increase diversity without violating the Supreme Court ruling. That means increasing outreach to minority communities and promoting its financial aid programs. 9 states had previously banned affirmative action at its public universities. Most saw a drop in minority students immediately after. Are you hopeful for the future?
I have to stay hopeful because that's what keeps us focused on being creative and innovating.
A long road ahead in the quest for diversity on campus. Rahema Ellis, NBC News, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.
One example, I think I worked in admissions for a college, and so I know that world very well. I know that those states that were highlighted, for example, that had already gotten rid of affirmative action, literally in some of the California did it back in 93 or 92 or something like that, and so their African American enrollment was cut in half back then, and only gained 1% after 20 years since. So I know they did it first, and a lot of those other places did it later. And so a lot of times we're unaware. Like even the 9 billion, I'm always big. I'm always big about entire context. The 9 billion in government contracting. I don't like to give people information in a silo way, because I don't want to oversize the 9 billion. That the 9 billion still was only 1.5% of all government contracting, right? And so that's not to highlight or act like the Democrats gave us something when we only got 1.5 billion %. You know what I mean? But again, to Shelley's point, people are getting disenfranchised and becoming apathetic. But to your point, a Killer Mike doing it at this time, was it the best time to highlight and add into the apathy when you're saying, hey, well, these people gave me this, and then now you're non-vote, or you decide to, again, I'm talking about collectively here.
Right.
I'm an independent. I vote both sides. I'm just making sure I'm being real clear. But I am highlighting that if you're concerned about the collective, if you're not, politics is personal interest. I can't knock you personally, and I don't waste time doing that. However, if you are concerned about the collective and you're having dialogues about what the parties do for us, if you're having those dialogues, then the reality is 9 billion down to 1.4 billion is a huge difference. Having fewer African Americans go to college across the country is a huge difference, and it will continue with that. Losing the health care that is being lost when we have the majority of our community in the lower 50 percentile of this country's wealth. When that's a reality, losing health care disproportionately hits us. Like, you can't have the dialogue honestly and factually without that. I did want to highlight just when we were playing that cut, Ricky Tiki, I guess, got his little tiki torches up, says Asians and whites are smarter. They have a higher IQ on average. You can look it up. Facts. That's misinformation and fake news, as our president loves to say. If you actually want to really do the research, there is one Jewish sect that literally averages a higher IQ than the rest of the world. The rest of the world, racially, ethnically, you will not find a higher IQ by group. There is one racial or ethnic sect in the Jewish community that averages well above the rest of the world, per se. They did create the banking. That same group is who created the banking system. So again, if you want to speak facts, I'll give it up where it goes. But that's not even all Jews. It's just a specific sect. The rest of the world does not. Asians outwork the rest of us when it comes to education and academically. That's what they actually do in our system. They outwork because they don't have higher IQs. But I just want to know that little dumb fact that somebody.
And so to that, I don't disagree. I agree with everything that you said. They don't do a good job of Democrats don't do a good job of expressing the things that they do. And I think it for the reason that you said, because they want that centrist Republican, that centrist conservative to lean left, if you will. But I think it's also important to understand when I make that statement that Killer Mike was warranted in his feelings is because, well, part of it is because they don't do a great job of vocalizing, advertising what they do.
And we're the base. We're the base, so it makes less sense for them not to advertise. But go ahead, Queen.
But they also, I think my frustration is a byproduct of how they manage their coalitions and political cowardice, how they cave. And that hurts us when they cave. I think they listen to the James Carvilles of the world and they say, this is what they want. And James Carville is back in the 70s and the 80s when what he thought was relevant I think he doesn't understand. He has not studied sociology, the current, what the newer generations, what millennials, what Gen Z, what Gen Alpha, the things that drive them. He's still basing his perspective on what drives boomers and what drives Gen Xers. And we need to also encompass, while we're still important, we also need to encompass what drives those younger populations as well. And so the political cowardice for me is a big thing. But I temper that, and this is where I think Killer Mike should have tempered his statement. He should understand that since 1968, the Republican Party has made it a part of their platform to place white racial grievance at the center of what they do. The policies that they make harm Black people. And should Trump get into office, he told us precisely what he was going to do. He didn't hide it. He said, the first day I get in there, I will do away with DEI. I will make it illegal. They've been trying to whittle away at the Voting Rights Act for years. It should not have been a secret. And that's why, the quote, to whom much is given, to whom much is required. The much is required is for folks who have that platform, celebrities who have that political platform, to understand the impact of the words that they speak and how they influence folks in our community. And whether we say celebrities should be influencing or not, there's a reason behind that, because there's a trust factor. Number one, we don't have a lot of faces that look like ours in those political spaces. And so we have to turn to folks who we feel that we can trust. And for us, sometimes that's our celebrities. And Killer Mike has shown up in ways to show that he is an advocate for the Black community. Absolutely. But I just think in this instance, he should have put a sock in it and did a little more reading and research before he made that statement.
Not fair enough. Oh, yeah.
I have the opportunity to use this platform now to try to course correct, because we need that course correction.
Not fair enough. And that's the one again, I know he and Shelley are great friends or whatever. The one thing that I would say to Shelley, and I didn't say it on the show, I thought about it afterwards as we prepare for this show, and me watching the cut again, is it wasn't that Goldie was making it his fault. Like, that's how he took the article. He took the attack as though they were just talking about the responsibility. And so you are open to critique. And in this situation, she thought the critique would be, you should have been quiet, and you still need to be quiet, considering what the results are. If you I applauded him for the work he done here in Georgia. So unfortunately, when you're out front by choice, it comes with the critique as well. So I think she only critiqued. I disagree with Shelley when he says they blamed him. I don't feel like anything I read in her writing was blaming him. So that's where that nuance is where I disagree with him. And so I know you wanted to talk about it today, and so we brought it up. And I'll just say again, for anybody out there listening, just to kind of say this. Here's another statement that quite often gets said about the Voting Rights Act that I hate. I've been hearing it recently by people I really, really respect. And it's not the first time I heard it, but this just happened. So, and Shelley said this on the show as well. And I challenged him later in some personal dialogue. But I want to definitely say this on the show before we go today, that people say, well, if they could take it away, then you never had the power. If when I'm talking about the voting right, they're referring to the voting right, like that, like this. Yeah. So people make this statement right now in our community. Some people of influence, and they think it's a very logical thing. Now, this goes back to the beginning of the show, LaTrice, when I talk about not understanding exactly what our ancestors have done. Like, we haven't learned the specifics of the civil rights. We got a kind of real clean version of what was being done. Like, we mistakenly think Martin Luther King and the Big Six wanted to be next to white people and wanted to integrate. Like, that's how we learn the history. No, what happens is, when you understand our democracy the way that they did, let me walk y'all through this, and you can jump in wherever you like, LaTrice. But when you understand how this country actually worked, let me give y'all some real history. So we come out of the Civil War. We got basically an illiterate progeny, a whole group of people that's relatively illiterate, right? We got people who had learned to read illegally, learned on their own. You know, some actually taught in the schools in the North. So we had people, whatever. So our people, generally speaking, made it say, you know what? Let's get our people literate. It's one of the fastest, one of the biggest phenomenons to see a group of people become literate as soon as we did, from basically being an illiterate people as fast as we did happen. Our people did that. But not only in becoming literate, what they also did during these 12 years of Reconstruction, when the army was in the South, basically, and white people couldn't touch us like they used to prior to the army being in the South. The ones that already were well educated and understood how governance work, they got into politics. They got into politics and were able to make a difference where we actually were aggregated and put people in the office to look out for our interests. That's what they were able to do. So then when the compromise of the South happens and the North agrees to remove the military, the Ku Klux Klan rose. Most people don't know what they was most upset about. They was most upset about Black people voting. They rode throughout the South to disenfranchise our vote while it was legally on the books that we could. Which amendment is this that passes that allows Black people to finally, Black men are first, like let's keep it like call it like it is. Black men were allowed to vote. I don't know if it's like 14th to 15th ratified. White women still couldn't vote. White women, no white or Black women couldn't vote when it first got ratified. But based on the ratification of the ability to vote, as soon as we were free, we voted and put 15th Amendment. Put 6 people in the highest offices in the land. Yep. And as soon as the military leaves the South, I'm going somewhere, y'all. Y'all work with me. As soon as the military leaves the South, it will be 50 years before we put another Black person in the Congress. Because the Ku Klux Klan did not, here it is, like, watch this. When you act like politics and the power of the vote, people hate that term now, especially if you're apathetic. You think the Ku Klux Klan rolled because they didn't understand? They understood the power. So they rolled. So it's on the books legally. But then they started writing Black codes like your grandfather, the grandfather clause had to roll. So if you go read the law, it don't say nothing about race. But the law was written to ensure, your grandfather wasn't a citizen prior to this.
Absolutely.
Oh, got to take the literacy test to when there's an illiterate group coming out of enslavement. A literacy test ain't got nothing to do with Black. No, it do. So I'm just walking through. You think they might put that much effort to disenfranchise the Black vote if there was no power in it? Why would somebody take it away?
Right. And
if there's no power, go ahead, Queen.
It's tremendous power in it because, I mean, less than a week after the Supreme Court's opinion, 3 states already have new maps that wiped out Black voting districts in less than 1 week. So it clearly matters. But where I was going was, so since you planned that meeting a while ago about the Black political agenda, I've been like tinkering with what I would think. Okay. And I've been sort of like playing with ranking which comes first, which comes second.
Okay,
so
let me hear it, Queen.
So first, I have economic policy, and I'm putting the rationale. The rationale is that this is
one thing. Let me say one thing, and then let you run these off.
Okay.
So I just want to close out again why I attacked the comment that if they can take it away when you've never had the power, what you're missing is our ancestors, the way our democracy works. I just highlighted how the KKK started to really, their first purpose was to take away our vote. They were completely successful at it. But here it is. Our ancestors who understood how this democracy worked, they actually put people in land when they could, and they get disenfranchised. Then the civil rights group comes along and actually get the votes, get the coalition, because at 13%, we couldn't get the Voting Rights Act passed ourselves. They made the right coalition coalitions to get the votes they needed, which means in our democracy, it ain't simply that it was taken away and you have no power. No, they use their power to get it put in place. So when you say if it can be taken away, you never had no power, it completely disregards the power of what the coalition and our ancestors actually did. You're dissing them. You're dissing our ancestors who actually understood the political process, made the coalitions necessary to have it be what it was. The Voting Rights Act served as a guardrail to those who never wanted us to have any representation. Right. If you think representation itself is not power, then go back to what I originally said, why the KKK wanted to ride, because we were getting too uppity and putting people in the power and controlling our own areas. They wanted to take that away. Go ahead, LaTrice. I just had to explain that whole thing.
But I'm going to give my second, the first, I think ranking first is economic policy. And that's because economic power determines who has resources, etc. Number two, and I think with your meeting, James said education should be one or something like that. But number two, and I actually initially I had number two as education, but the more that I watch this administration, the more I watch the erosion of our civil rights. Number two is political power, voting rights, and civil rights restoration. Because you cannot sustain any economic gains without control over the rules. Political power determines what passes, what gets blocked. It controls judicial appointments, which we see are very important. It shapes budgets. Absolutely. Civil rights restoration belongs here because legal fortification is what locks political gains in and prevents the next executive order from erasing them. But we have, to me, and you can play with economics and political power, voting rights between 1 and 2, but they are the top two because they are impacting how we show up, how our needs get met. And what's happening now in the South is that they are minimizing Black voices because these votes are going to determine who represents them and are their needs being represented. And the South, if it didn't matter, they would not have had those maps ready to go and passed in less than a week.
Yeah. Why would somebody fight to take something away that we? And what happened is what we're doing right now. Now this connects to the beginning of the show. We can get ready to get out of here, if you will. But it's the pathology that makes us say comments like, if they can take it away, you never had the power, because we've pathologized. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like the way we receive the loss is a without knowing. The people that are saying that, they don't know that they're disrespecting the efforts of our ancestors who actually built the coalition and got the votes to get these guardrails in place. They don't mean it that way. I know that. Right.
It's a cliche. It sounds good, so they repeat it.
Yeah. And what happens is, it's because you have this collective thought that we have no power. It's just so untrue because somebody's working so hard to take it. Here's another comment that I know you've heard a million times, and I wanted to let you hear my response because I like that you have that number two. And I think when you hear this comment that's said often and my response to it, I think you lining it up at 2 is actually right. So another good friend of mine highlighted, I don't know if it was his quote or whatever, but I've seen it said many times. Asian Americans tend to have the highest household incomes despite relatively lower voter participation rates, while Black Americans tend to have higher voter participation but lower median household incomes. Here's what I had to say to my good friend. I said, people say that all the time, but there is so much context lost in this comparison that is really an apples to oranges comparison. Also, people skip right over how involved Asians are in San Francisco and a few other cities where they are aggregated. They literally have a textile lobbyist for their garment districts. We also skip over the reason Asians got hate crime laws passed during COVID is because of the capital they use to influence politicians. Although neither of these examples should be mistaken as good reason to compare median income and political involvement. Let's also add, historically, Asians didn't succeed in this country until they were no longer targets of our government's politics. The Black community has never enjoyed that luxury.
Absolutely. And to even push that narrative, because that's furthering white supremacy, because back in the 60s, I forget, 70s, they actually, that was a white supremacist push, because the Asians are the good ones. Don't be like the black ones, be like the Asian ones. And that narrative is still pushed today. And we need to be mindful of that, because they were intentionally placing two marginalized groups against each other in their battle for supremacy over both of us.
Just like they pitted indentured Africans with poor white. And again, ours got put into law. All right, here's a couple clips to end this thing. Just again,
but before you do that,
go ahead.
We've had to fight for everything. And so it wasn't that it was given to us. Our ancestors fought for it. And we have a responsibility to stop the diminishment of their work, to stop the erosion of the rights that they fought so hard for. We have a responsibility to not allow, because we are supposed to leave this world better for our children than it was for us. But instead, we're now having to rebuild what they already took the time to build. And we didn't pay attention. We didn't learn the things that we needed to learn. We didn't engage in politics the way that we needed to engage in politics. And now we got to fight for them back all over again. That's the sadness.
Yeah. And here's the thing for anybody out there listening that has a concept. And again, this is talking about, I hope I can make this hit home. And so the pathology, and I get it. When these things are taken away, there's this concept of tending to retreat. Again, our civil rights movement, those that got into position during Reconstruction, it was never done to be next to white people. This is not me trying to be or against being next to white people. But I want people to understand what the bigger picture was. When we go, again, we talked about at the beginning, being from inhuman to second-class citizenship to what the civil rights movement did get it. Us not knowing what our history is how we allowed it to be taken away. That's why we're having to beg people to vote. And I was like, what does the voting actually get you and all this type of stuff? Well, here's the thing that people don't understand. Our ancestors fought in every war but one in this country. And that was like one little short war. And there were no black participants. But outside of every war this country has ever been in, we fought in every war. Abraham Lincoln, I mentioned this part in my book. He invited black leaders to the lawn of the White House at one point, the black leaders of that time. And because Abraham Lincoln once had a notion prior to the Civil War of saying, man, what if I just ship black people back to, somewhere in Africa, with that, keep our country from being so divided. And he asked the blacks at that time, who had been here a couple hundred years, what do y'all think of that? And they said, no, this is our home. And I'm not, for anybody out there, I want y'all to listen real close to the nuance of what I'm saying. If you saw the cut where Killer Mike highlighted, we built this shit. So why wouldn't you take ownership? We watched our progeny come out of this Civil War and literally create a number of black enclaves, that we now learn about, right? We've learned about, many of those now. So the Black Wall Streets and the, those type of things. So we talk about what they did. And so what happened was, prior to the civil rights period, all our shit could get wiped away. We know about the burning down of Black Wall Street. We know what happened in Rosewood. We know about eminent domain putting highways through our areas. We know about those things. All those things can happen. You can have your own thing, but if you ain't in the room to make the political decision of where the highway goes, you wake up and there's a highway coming through your city.
I.e.
No matter
urban
how much
renewal.
money you got in your city. So our ancestors fought to say we got to be represented. This country started off for representation without taxation. So you can have your economics together. That's why LaTrice's hierarchy makes sense. She puts the economic part, because the Asians can influence to add to the hate crime bill. And I say add to the hate crime bill because something that we misunderstood. We thought they got something. It was already in place for us in the 80s. They just got added on to it. Like, just so y'all know, like, believe it or not, you could get an extra 10 years if you committed a hate crime against a black person since the late 80s. So it wasn't something they got that we didn't get. It's already been in place. Somebody had already smartly used the system to have it in place. Like, we don't pay attention to what we've actually done.
Right.
Have these things in place. So here's where I want to make this make the most sense if I could. So what they fought for wasn't to be next to the white. Wasn't that? It was this. So that when you built something, it couldn't be taken away. That's what it was. So I'll use this analogy. Like, people know now, or thanks to social media, we learn a lot of history. So people know that Major League Baseball and Jackie Robinson, the integration in that period, the Negro League, if there's actually those games that are recorded, the Negro Leagues, when they would play the Major League white teams, the record is great compared to when they would play the Major League white teams. I'm talking about when everything was separated, when Big Ray, Bob, I think it's Rob Foster or whatever, Rube Foster or whatever, that owned the Negro League or whatever. So our teams fared very well. And people say, have this thing about integration and how that people feel like when you're suggesting, LaTrice, that we got to fight for these things, they think it's still black people trying to get white people stuff. Like, that's what it feels like to them. But here's the reality of why I'm making the baseball analogy. Major League Baseball without black people, we already know what it was. The Negro Leagues, as good as it was, here's a reality that this is the ultimate reason why this show was done today. The thing that we have failed to understand that our ancestors understood is this right here. While the Negro League Baseball may have whooped Major League Baseball at that time and could beat them and may have been better, ain't neither one of those leagues better than the best from both leagues playing together. That is marketplace dynamics. That's the reality of the best playing the best. And we are going to a global and world society. And while these politics, for those who say, oh, what did we lose? Or we haven't lost anything. Yeah, we basically shitted on our efforts of our ancestors to not pay attention and to allow this to happen. And you can stay apathetic, but you can have a highway driven through whatever you want if you ain't part of the governance and politics of your area. Absolutely. That's the reality. That's the power that they took away and why they redraw the lines, as LaTrice said, so quickly. They know what it is. It's time for us to wake up to what the efforts our ancestors did. We owe it to them to make sure this ain't about whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. It's about the involvement and understanding the political process and the role that it plays when you are a target. That little comment about the Asians, yes, that is who they are when they're spread out. When they're aggregated, they immediately put their funds together and get involved in politics. We have cities where we're aggregated and people are sitting out here saying, oh, they ain't gonna give us nothing. You damn right. That's why you got to get involved and take it. Hope that makes sense. I'm gonna close it out with that. LaTrice, thank you for the extra time today. Cool. Eric, LaTrice, tell them about some of the stuff you got upcoming before we go. I'm gonna
in June, I'm having the inaugural Common Ground Supper Club dinner, which is an inclusive event where where it's Black centered, but allies are welcome as we talk about solutions to move us forward from where we are, even though we've backed up a little bit. So that's what's coming. My book, Falling Black in Love Again, will be released this fall, mid-August. I'm very excited about that. So those are the two things that are on the forefront right now. So very excited. If you're in Atlanta, join us for the Common Ground Supper Club inaugural dinner.
All right, I'm going to end this with an actual cut for all people from Shaheed Bosun. Just something I think is an appropriate thought to leave us with for today's conversation. I had a lot more to say, but I ain't gonna have LaTrice up here while I'm just monologuing on it like that. So I have some shows coming, but I ain't gonna do that to the Queen no more. But thank you for your time today, Queen.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
I don't know if you can think of a people who were more held back, more deprived, more sabotaged than African Americans. You took everything away from them and took them away from everything. They started in your country at less than zero, literally regarded and treated as subhuman, not allowed to learn to read or write or anything for hundreds of years. But you see, they come from a people of accomplishment to one degree or another, not a people of piracy and theft and appropriation. They come from a people who created and built and developed in their own countries, in their own land. And even though you did everything that you could possibly do to suppress them, to hold them down, to hold them back, and you're still doing that until today, nevertheless, I don't think anyone can dispute the fact that African Americans have become a global cultural superpower. And people like this, with a history like this, with a legacy like this, simply cannot be held back.
Atlanta, Friday, May 15th at 7 p.m. Pull up to the Mental Dialogue Live experience at Urban Grind. This ain't your average game night. It's cards, competition, bold debates, real networking, and sharp conversations with people who came to connect. Business owners and event hosts, bring your pitch because you will get 1 minute to promote your brand live in the room. Good coffee, big energy, smart people, and real dialogue all night long. Find us at 962 Marietta Street Northwest. Get details now at mentaldialogue.com. All I ask is that you think.
How did you enjoy your experience?
I can go first if that's okay. I'm not gonna lie, I loved it. I loved getting to talk to new people, interact with new people, and I loved getting to hear everybody's perspective on things. So for this specific event, we had different people kind of give their opinions, debate things out, even debate sides that they didn't even want to debate, but it was so nice getting to hear other people's perspectives. And the game night was super cool too. Like, it was a nice opportunity to get to know people on a casual level. So 10 out of 10, I would definitely come again.